Good evening and welcome to the Viva Cost podcast. You're here with your host, Graham Spence. I have Alison Graham also with me. Hello, Alison.
Hi, Graham.
How are you today?
Yeah, very good, thanks.
And we have a
Glad to
special
be a
guest.
guest on.
We do.
Yeah.
We have Councillor Bailey Lee Robb. Bailey, can you hear us?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Welcome to the podcast. You're our first guest.
Thanks for having me.
That's probably not a good thing for you. We are going to talk about today specifically the SNP leadership contest, the end of the SNP leadership contest, and where that leaves us. We've now had cabinet appointments, we've had Humza Yousaf sworn in as the new First Minister of Scotland, and we've got a new outlook on what the SNP is going to be delivering for the people of Scotland. So we're going to get into that. Alison, do you want to give us a summary of what's happened over the last few days?
Yeah, so we were at the actual count on Monday. It seems to have been such a long time ago, but it was actually only Monday. So Bailey and myself were both there. I know you were elsewhere doing exciting things in Paris. Exactly. So so that's when the leadership contest concluded, and Humza Yousaf was announced as the winner. From there, we've had his official, confirmation in Parliament on the Tuesday as First Minister, and then from there all the usual rigmarole that goes along with that, selecting the cabinet, a selection in the ministerial posts, being sworn in at the court session. It's all been happening. It's all been going on.
It's all been very exciting. Bailey, you were obviously Ash Regan's official campaign manager. Can you tell us a little bit about the feeling going into that room and what the result brings for us?
I mean, the feeling going into the result, we always knew sort of that, something extraordinary would have to be pulled off for Ash to, have pulled it out the bag, so to speak. But, in there, when we were 5 minutes out from the result, the mood in the room turned quite sour, Alison, wouldn't you say, in terms of, it was the feeling of, the party was on a knife edge, and it's either continuity or it's small c Conservative with, and it was very much a divide in the room as well, with people sitting. I was sitting next to Michelle Thompson and Jim Fairley, two of Kate's campaign manager and supporter, and everyone else for Humza was on the other side of the room. So it was quite intense. Yeah, divided, yeah, but in terms of when he tried to heal it with his speech, it didn't really cut through with our side of the room, I would think.
So we've obviously gone to a position where Humza Yousaf won the election, but there's obviously, he won it with Ash Regan's second preferences, which is obviously very, very interesting because everybody knew everybody assumed, I should say, that Ash Regan's second preferences were going to break for Kate Forbes. Now, they did. However, a greater proportion than what was expected actually broke for Humza Yousaf, and without them, he couldn't have gone into victory. So there's an argument that actually Humza Yousaf's success was only bought on the back of Ash Regan's campaign ideas and her second preferences. So there's certainly something interesting in there. We've seen. I don't know if you want to come on to it, Alison, because obviously I was out of the country, but there was a development on Humza Yousaf offering the other two candidates, or at least one of the candidates, a position in government. What happened there?
Yeah, so when you go back to the speech, it sounded very much from Humza Yousaf's initial speech when he won, that he was going to have a place for both his contest, the other candidates in his government. So there was conversations, I think, straight after the result with both candidates. Bailey would know more. I think you were probably in the room, but there was nothing offered as far as we could ascertain on that day, and subsequently there's been nothing offered at all to Ash Regan, and I think that surprised a lot of people. Also, the Kate Forbes one was in the media as being offered from being probably the second highest kind of position after First Minister as Finance Secretary. Finance Minister rather. She was offered rural affairs, and there's been a bit of to and fro in the media of what that actually means, and some people saying, oh, she should have taken the role. There's lots of stuff could have done in land reform, etc. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more, the way the government is positioning on that is very contrary to what Ash has said. What Kate has said through the campaign of what her ideas for the Highlands and Islands are, particularly in the kind of rural Scotland, like where I live as well. So I don't think it was quite as simple as that. Plus, it was a clear demotion, and very much in the room, the atmosphere in the room. I agree, Bailey. It was. I actually thought people were some of the senior people I was kind of watching, and they looked very worried. I think there was a kind of nervousness, with a kind of a smile on front from a few people, because clearly the election concluding is not going to resolve overnight. The problems that have been acknowledged by people like Michael Russell, who said the party's in a mess, as he's taken over as interim CEO. So I think there's a lot more of this story to come out, particularly who's going to be the actual CEO and how long that appointment will take. And I think that's going to be something we need to really follow over the next kind of weeks and months. There is still a live police investigation into SNP finances. I believe there's a couple of things going on investigation-wise. So I think what happens at the kind of HQ side will be very interesting. A lot of them were there. Certainly I saw Sue Ruddock there, I saw Scott Martin there, and obviously Michael Russell now, who's the kind of interim CEO. But there was quite a nervous atmosphere. I would say it was not a kind of upbeat, euphoric atmosphere. It was pretty flat, actually, and I think the media probably picked up on that as well. They were probably expecting a different type of kind of response to the win. It was, I think generally it was very flat.
And it was flat because it was sort of, it's coming back to what I'd said. It was either continuity under Humza, if he won, or sort of this new path for the SNP, or as the media have called it, a small C shift for the SNP. And to come back on what you had said there about the feelings put over by senior people. I mean, everyone that I witnessed there who sort of depends on HQ or is employed by HQ was very, very much coming across as nervous, as pretty snippet of, looking everywhere, having to know everything, controlling the room, controlling the media, controlling the candidates' teams. And then obviously straight after the win, it was everyone from HQ so delighted the progressiveness continues, and everyone is well aware of my frustrations on the progressive point. I was sort of like, well, come on.
So would you obviously were the point person for HQ. What were the sort of requirements they asked for a candidate on that day?
On the day from candidates, they were, first of all, I mean, there's a wider thing here on the communication that comes from HQ and that sec, and that for so long of the campaign, in fact, the overwhelming majority of it, the National Secretary refused to communicate with anyone but candidates. And, Michelle Thompson is on record for saying that as well. But, so I think, going forward, that needs to be looked into. But in terms of...
Sorry. I'm cutting across you. I was going to say, what do you think would be overall? The campaign's been characterised as there was information withheld, the electorate was withheld, there was no official communication, so effectively no election communication went out to all members, because you weren't allowed to send an email, which is obviously quite controversial because in every other SNP election that's usually a given. You would have had the opportunity to send an email when you were selected as a councillor. Is that a council candidate? Sorry.
Yeah, that was correct. To characterise the election in that way and on this specific point that we're discussing is absolutely correct. I mean, on the membership numbers, for example, when we had asked for that, we weren't given it. And then when we eventually did learn of it after the pressure from predominantly ourselves and Kate's team, that we found that out via the media. And, when we raised this with the National Secretary and HQ, it was sorry, there's been an issue with our outgoing emails. Well, I wouldn't agree with that point in the sense that we've still got other emails come through from the National Secretary around about that time.
Yeah.
So,
and the media always got email.
Yeah, there's a very much sense of breakdown in communication before the communication had even started, and the point on only communicating with the candidate is a key point, because I don't think that happened in every team, but it certainly happened in ours and Kate's. I know for a fact, and that. Normally in an election, you appoint a campaign manager or an election agent, and you devolve a lot of responsibility to them. So, for example, yeah, because they're an agent of you and of your campaign. It was only the day before the results were announced where I had any communication with Lorna, and that was simply because Ash had to take time out to rest. Obviously, it was a bruising campaign, pretty exhausting. And it was to confirm her speech. If she was to win, we need to send that over. We'd send over the names of the people that would accompany her. So that was the only communication I ever had with the National Secretary. But I know other people in our team had tried to communicate throughout the campaign and, sort of fell on deaf ears. Now, to give Lorna her due, she has done a good job at managing the campaign. Do I think things could have went better? Absolutely. There's always room to improve. And communication is a big part of that.
Yeah, I think there's another.
I can feel you rolling your eyes that she's done a good job. Could you tell me what you don't think she's done a good job at?
There's something I just want to raise about the fact that the candidates were the only ones being communicated to. That people have to understand that this was not during recess. This was during, the parliamentary session. There was an expectation, on the one side to be in the parliament and to be doing, all your parliamentary duties. Plus, you were the one to deal with all the kind of emails and things, which is a really odd way to set people up in your own party to succeed. And I think, the kind of, obviously Kate's on maternity leave still till April, I believe. And clearly as it's, come out through the campaign, there's been a lot of HQ people and like staff members helping in Hamza's campaign. So, Ash had a pretty small campaign in comparison, and both Kate and Ash had a cold start. Whereas, we understand from certain events and different things that have been kind of become clear that Hamza actually had a heads up of Nicola standing down. I know he had a legal action against the nursery that was pretty controversial, that was suddenly dropped just like in the week before.
It does seem somewhat odd, doesn't it? A week or two before the minister.
We did say at the time, Graham, that we thought, oh, that's an odd thing to do, but none of us and nobody I've ever spoken to had ever considered Hamza Yousaf as a potential leadership candidate. No. So I think that's kind of what threw us off.
So I want to quickly just recircle the wagons. Certainly one of the criticisms that's been levelled at Nicola Sturgeon was that she was effectively handed First Minister in the coronation by Alex Salmond when he was the First Minister. He was not someone... He was known for a much smaller tent approach. He had his loyal deputies and his loyal cabinet and loyal ministers. He had 15 ministers in total in the Scottish Government. He had a much smaller government. He manifested that through and handed the power over to Nicola Sturgeon, who was effectively the second in command and the one to be anointed. It was always rumoured that Nicola Sturgeon was doing the same with John Swinney. However, John Swinney has been the party leader already. And secondly, John Swinney had no ambition to be the First Minister, was very clear about that. So I don't think anybody suggests that Nicola Sturgeon was developing John Swinney's a fair argument. So it brings us on to, Nicola Sturgeon obviously decided not to wait for the summer recess, which is odd in itself, but there's a lot going on in the party, and she was recently bruised by the GRR process.
Not even Easter recess.
Yeah, sorry, the Easter recess. Sorry, I should have said Easter. So it levelled a question on who would Nicola Sturgeon have wanted as her successor, and obviously the Hamza Yousaf campaign were quite keen to point out it was them. However, previous to that, I think, Kate Forbes had been rumoured by the media, and that was because she got up and gave quite a good speech after Derek Mackay went away, which is kind of odd because Derek Mackay himself was probably the next in line, if I can say that, because he certainly seemed to be the one that the party, he was business convener of the party, got in the front of the stage at the National Conference, he was the finance secretary, he had a lot of top jobs, he had transport, he'd done a lot of the things you would do if you were trying to become First Minister. So
it was generally accepted that he was the kind of First Minister in waiting.
Yeah, I think we
I agree with you on that point in terms of like it was going to be this continuity of we're handing it down sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's a bad thing that we had a contest. In fact, I think it actually hurt us and put us in this position because if you don't have a challenger to your leadership, if you don't have critical friends, so to speak, amongst you and amongst the party, then is it really a democratic party?
No. You're right. It isn't, and there should be a contest, and the contest shouldn't be a hand down. It shouldn't be a coronation. It certainly shouldn't be. Can we skip rather than Derek Mackay and their old news? Let's have a look at the current news, and this is what I want you to kind of weigh in on because you'll know some of them a bit better than me. But I'll give a headline. So Hamza Yousaf's the new First Minister. He's picked Shona Robison as his Deputy First Minister and Finance Secretary, which came almost immediately out the gate. He sort of announced that on the whim. Now, Shona Robison, Alison, you'll be able to talk to this, I'm sure. You served your time on the NEC. Shona Robison is also one of Nicola Sturgeon's best friends. So
yep.
Hamza Yousaf is already chained to one of her best friends. Michael Matheson isn't particularly known as a strong Sturgeonite, I wouldn't think. But Jenny Gilruth is in there, another Nicola Sturgeon friend, and also partner to Kezia Dugdale of the Labour Party. We have Mary McCallan, and this is the one where I get particularly aggrieved, because Mary McCallan effectively is Nicola Sturgeon's really good friend that gets trotted around the cut. I remember when we done Shirley Ann Somerville's adoption day, Mary McCallan was brought along as the singer. And, I wouldn't rate her singing abilities, to be fair. But, she was brought, she's probably better than she's a singer. But she was brought along, and it's another Sturgeon friend. We've got Neil Gray, who was Hamza's loyal friend, so fair enough. Mary Goujon, nothing there. Angus Robertson, another Nicola Sturgeon fan club member. Shirley Ann Somerville, another personal friend of Nicola Sturgeon. And Angela Constance, who is not a friend of Nicola Sturgeon, I do not believe. So you've got one in the cabinet, maybe, that isn't a friend of Nicola Sturgeon, it seems. This is continuity. This is effectively, in fact, I'll give him credit. It is a majority female cabinet, and it is the first one we've had, and that's something nice to see. However, it does seem like he's stuffed the deck with Nicola Sturgeon's pals and presumably his pals too. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add on that?
Yeah. I mean, as a woman, we've had a balanced, cabinet before, and it's not exactly, promoted women's rights. So that's, takes us back to December last year with the self-ID and, the protests outside, and now we've got Section 35, the UK government, which is not an ideal position to be in. I think Angela Constance is probably the only one who didn't come out for any candidate who's in Hamza's government. I think Michael Matheson did, which I was quite surprised. But yeah, it looks like a very interesting position in that we potentially have got a stronger backbench than we've got front bench now. There's now, I think, about 12 people who I would say were front bench contenders who are now on the back benches, which is very interesting. And obviously in December with the GRR bill, the 9 rebels, as they were called at the time, because there was 9 of them, none of them lost the whip. There was no sanction to voting against the whip, which is very unusual, because they would have lost their majority. So if that 9 is maintained or even grown, I think that makes Holyrood very interesting after recess to see what actually happens. There's not been a lot for a party that has been pushing out the word progressive like it's going out of fashion. It's a bit kind of Brexit means Brexit. It's like thrown in everywhere. They're not progressing law very fast at the moment. We've got a hate crime bill coming up for 2 years on the legislative shelf as unimplemented, and we've got a GRR bill which took up so much parliamentary time right into literally until the lights went out before Christmas, and twice. Well, the next time, I think, the second night, I think they reset the timer. But, there's things like the male suicide, issues that were shelved because of that. And yet here we are, it's not implemented. The clock's ticking for them actually challenging on judicial review. I think it's middle of April which is coincidentally 2-year anniversary of the hate crime bill passing royal assent, still not implemented. So there's a whole bunch of stuff around what progressive actually means. It's something that's almost used as a badge of honour or a beating stick, where actually progressive government is government that gets things done.
Bailey?
I mean, my view on the progressive stuff is very well known. I was very frustrated in the sense that, a vote for Hamza is a vote to continue progressive values and this progressive way in which Scotland has moved towards. And it was a frustration of mine because what that essentially levelled at Ash and Kate was a vote for them, you're voting to take us to the right, we're going to move away from progressiveness. And it's absolutely not true. I mean, as a leader, you have your own values that are personal to you, you've got your own beliefs, but you are there as a servant to the party, as their leader, and you implement party policy whether or not you agree with it, in the sense that obviously that would be increasingly difficult depending on the policy. But for example, Kate had said, whilst my faith, my beliefs may not align with X, Y, or Z, the party and the country requires me or asks of me to implement that, and that is what I will do, or words to that effect. In terms of the cabinet, I would disagree on some of the points made, but absolutely, it does strike me as a continuity candidate. It's good to have people who have actually served in that sector or in that industry be given that portfolio. So, for example, Jenny Gilruth was a teacher. We've not had a teacher in education for some time now. Angela Constance was a social worker and drugs, alcohol worker. She's in charge of justice and home affairs. Great appointments in there. Then, in terms of the overall cabinet, you're right in terms of Shona. It was quite quick off the bat, and I had actually been expecting and had been speaking for the past week or so on who would be appointed to which job as we had obviously drafted up Ash's cabinet plans. And Shona was a big hitter for DFM for Hamza, and it's what we had been hearing through the grapevine anyway. But I think it speaks volumes that a party leader and a new First Minister that is elected and promises to bridge the divide, promises that there is no more Team Kate, Team Ash, Team Hamza, we're Team SNP, to then go on and offer a demotion, yes, from the gravitas of Finance and Economy Secretary. You struggle to see where the bridging is, but he went a step further in terms of his wider cabinet, and he put in Siobhan Brown, which is a great appointment. I'm very pleased for Siobhan. I think she'll make a great minister, but she's only Kate Backer in there. Obviously, we don't know how Angela voted, and that's, if Angela wants to keep that private, that's for Angela. But everyone else in there was a Hamza backer. And like, what you had said, Alison, the backbench is stronger in terms of the experience. I mean, for example, you've got the Ewings, Kate Forbes, Ash Regan, you've got Kenny Gibson, all these people, Ruth Maguire, that are very skilled and very experienced in the parliamentary process and arithmetic and scrutinising government. I mean, all you have to do is look at Kenny Gibson on the finance economy, which he chairs, coming out against the National Care Service bill. I think we're going to see much more contention within the party. I hope we see much more contention in the party. Again, it would stop us passing bad legislation, because ultimately bad legislation is being passed. It either sits on the shelf for a couple of years and we forget about it, or we partially implement it, or we pass bad legislation and we're challenged in court on it, and we waste millions and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. And one of the first things that Hamza had said during the campaign was, I'll challenge the Section 35 order. He then moved that on to I'll fight every general election on getting rid of the Section 35 order. Then he had to switch to, I'll campaign for independence, I'll be your first activist, pardon me. Yeah. And then he changed that to I will review the legal advice, and if in the interest, I will challenge it. Then had to back roll and say he's going to challenge it anyway. And by the end of it, no one actually knew what his position was. But in one of the first conversations that I had with some internal people to government and within the party, they says that absolutely, that he's off to challenge it, and he's challenging it with or without the legal advice. And I think we're in dangerous territory here, especially when you're looking at the rebel. The Rebel Alliance is what I've called them in terms of everyone who's on the backbench now, because let's say for example the opposition bring a vote on not wanting to challenge that legal advice. If those rebels decide to sit on their hands or vote with the opposition, as some probably would, because they feel betrayed or they feel compelled to do it, then the government really need to look. I mean, we're getting into the territory now where it doesn't matter if you've got the Greens on side, because if you discipline those 9, for example, if you kick them out, your majority is gone. You have to call back all your ministers, so you don't get to slip your ministers. Hamza has the hardest job in the world right now, and he has to play it really carefully. And I think this week has showed that he doesn't really care about that in one sense. He'll pack his cabinet full of his friends, and only having that one critical friend of Siobhan Brown who didn't agree with him. So I think we're going to be.
You're basically saying that the payroll vote of the ministers that he could previously have counted on, where he could have bought over some support from the Reagan or Forbes sectors of the party, he's effectively conceded that ground and now has to rely on his own team in effectively what is a minority government to pass legislation.
Well, effectively yes, but at the same time, you need to remember that. And it comes back to when we look at the Tories in Westminster. Now, you often hear on the news of the Tories, there's a 3-line whip, and if the Tories don't win this, then the government could fall, and they kick people out who don't vote with 3-line whips. You've got to remember that the SNP in Holyrood, for as long as I can remember, have every single day at decision time had a 3-line whip. A 3-line whip was meant to be used in the event that the government was going to lose a vote, so to speak, or it was a contentious policy issue, or it was on a piece of legislation. So,
can you confirm that for us? Because that's a Vivacos exclusive then. Obviously, you work within the Parliament, and obviously a 3-line whip is an urgent or significant vote. I'm reading it off the Parliament site just now. Important divisions are underlined 3 times. A 3-line whip normally applied to major events, such as second readings of significant bills. Defying a 3-line whip is very serious and usually will result in the whip being withdrawn or expelled from the party. They may keep their seat or they may have the whip restored later. So 3-line whips serious. Are you saying, Bailey, that 3-line whips are very common in the Scottish Parliament and in fact used on a daily or weekly basis?
I think that the description you've read out is obviously from the UK Parliament's website.
Yeah.
But in terms of what you've described, it wouldn't be too different, obviously, to a 3-line whip in Holyrood. But 3-line whips have become increasingly common. But I think that's the case across all parties in the Scottish Parliament, and I don't understand it. I don't understand why.
Yeah, there's a few things there, Bailey, that's really interesting. That when all the talk, you talked earlier about progressive. So the progressive legislation of like the same-sex marriage bill was a free vote. It was a conscious vote, the conscience vote, and people voted by majority for it. Now, surely that shows a more progressive parliament and a more progressive country, with that backing behind. But to have to 3-line whip the GR.
I don't know.
Just wanted to mention one more thing about the Section 35. If Hamza Yousaf goes against legal advice, the Lord Advocate could resign. The Lord Advocate took a preemptive reference to the Supreme Court on a potential draft independence referendum bill because she couldn't give legislation. The with incompetence. If it wasn't with incompetence, the UK government would have been challenged on a Section 34. But they challenged on a Section 35 because it is within legal competence but has impact on reserved legislation. So this is going to be really interesting, to see what is actually the most important thing to Humza Yousaf's government. Is he willing to lose his Lord Advocate over it?
I mean, I won't be drawn into speculation, obviously, over resignations. We're still in the first few days of a government. I'll leave that up to you avid podcasters and bloggers.
That was the argument. That was the argument with the IndyRef bill, why they just didn't push it through from a backbencher when they had the majority to get it through, and then have the UK government come after them. That was the whole rationale from Nicola Sturgeon of why it was a preemptive reference.
Well, there's good news for you, Alison. You're not going to have to wait long to find out.
It's only 2 and a bit weeks.
What is the date? The 15th April?
Something like that. It was the 19th, I think, that the Section 35 order.
I mean, I think we know clearly what action a Humza government is going to take, in the sense that it will challenge it, and it's a matter of
why didn't Nicola Sturgeon
regret.
challenge it though? Why did Nicola Sturgeon not challenge it in the month that she was still in power?
Well, her argument was always that effectively there was no challenge, and the UK government would eventually, take it on the chin. Which
I think Nicola knew that she was going to resign, and it was mentioned earlier as to why did she resign. And again, I won't be drawn into speculation or conspiracy theories that plague. But
what you go on the podcast then for? That's what we do here.
I think that Nicola's decision to step down was one that shocked everyone. But I think she knew for something. I think she knew before Christmas. In fact, someone had said that was quite close to her. They knew she was stepping down when she started taking driving lessons. So
that was Lloyd.
So in terms of why she stood down, when she did, I think it's because it was a halfway point. And speaking to voters, speaking to SNP members, speaking to people on the doorstep over the last few weeks, it's been yes, they know that it's been divisive for the party, and the leadership contest might not have put the party in the best light, but it was done at this point so that there is enough time to recover the image of the party and of the party leader in time for 2026.
It's a fair point.
So how
Leadership
does that
elections are
explain
boring for most parties.
how does it explain the response to the Supreme Court judgment on November being pushed to a conference in March that then didn't happen? Why March? So she knew she was stepping down. Why did she not just have it in January?
I don't think anybody's happy about that, though, are they? I mean, let's.
A lot of branches put a lot of effort into that.
Absolutely. I mean, I was working across the political education officer network in Mid-Scotland and Fife, and there was a lot of good quality work that was done by those people. And it was a shame. It was a shame as well, because we were told early 2023, and it's like that thing of when you're promised that, when the weatherman promises you that spring is upon us and we're going to have 20 degrees, and then he tells you, on the last day of spring, here's your 20 degrees. It's this sort of thing, or we're going to have it in early spring.
Or no snow, but we're having a referendum.
Yeah, come what may.
Well, yeah.
Well, May is going to come and go before the
It does make it very difficult for people to trust politicians when such.
I think that was why people were so drawn to Kate and Ash, on the sense that, and this is, I had spoken to quite a few voters, both SNP and no, and they say that they were attracted to supporting Kate and Ash because they were straight talking. They told how it is. They didn't see the sound bites. They didn't see the political talk, so to speak. It was very upfront, and that's, and don't get me wrong, Ash was on a back foot here in terms of her media performances, at the very beginning. But
I think just recognition, to be honest, was a big hamper.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you watch a few interviews from the start to the ones that she was doing at the end of the campaign, she had transformed. She'd got better. But what didn't compromise, what never compromised, was her ability to just be straight talking, honest, and tell you how it is. And people want that. People are crying out for that. We don't want sound bites. We don't want policy-free politics, as it's called. You know, with these leaders that will just get up and they'll talk to the TV cameras and they'll tell you that, you know, I'll take no lectures from Douglas Ross or things like that.
Well, you say that, but 52% of the SNP did vote in second preference rounding for Hamza Yousaf, so they
have
did.
to remember.
48 by first preference.
So here's the question: what can the SNP do? So obviously, Hamza Yousaf will not be the final. Well, hopefully, he's not the final minister of the SNP. I would like to think that we're going to continue having, you know, the SNP is the political force in Scotland. I wouldn't like to see the rise of Scottish Labour and their dimwits, but let's consider for a second, what can the SNP do? So the SNP really alighted to the fact that there's a 2-year process before we go into a general election test. We may actually be seeing a by-election, an early by-election with Margaret Ferrier, which I could go on for hours, but we'll cover Margaret Ferrier separately because I think there's been some unfair treatment there. But what can the SNP do in the next 2 years? So first of all, let's talk about, you know, Ash Regan came in, obviously not having the media experience of the other two. I wouldn't say Kate Forbes was particularly media polished either, because she got dumped in a role rather than trained into the role. And then secondly, what can the SNP do in general to ensure that it's top tier? You know, we've talked about the backbench being stronger than the front bench. What can they do about making sure the top tier of their party are actually competent at media? And I'm not talking about go and teach them how to do sound bites and how to do things like that, but how can we make it so that the people in the party are actually good enough to be the MPs or MSPs of that party, and in such a way that they can represent and advocate for Scotland? Because that's the ultimate thing here. We are in a marketing competition with the union. What can the SNP do in the next 2 years? Alison?
So, one, it's not 2 years. It's possibly, it could even be kind of outsider. It could be like later this year in the autumn. But the kind of smart money is on next spring. So we're kind of a year away from a general election. And I think that's not long in campaign terms. No. So the problem we've got is vetting is the weakness in the SNP now. Who they actually get in as candidates, and they've got a lot of sitting MPs at the moment. Some of them are exceptionally good, others maybe less so. But for the general election, to fight other seats of who's not, you know, already an elected member, I really think from what I've seen on the ground is they're really struggling to get candidates. I mean, they struggled to get people to even stand for the NEC. There was quite a lot of positions that weren't filled in the NEC last time, and they actually had to then go and try and actively, you know, kind of recruit people to the NEC. There was not all the committees. Now, the year that I ran, it was oversubscribed, and it was actually pretty healthy. Back to what we were saying, Bailey was saying about contest, it was quite a healthy democratic contest, and that pretty much I think all the seats were contested. So you had, I think everybody got through the nominations because people actually worked for it and got, you know, enough votes to get through to the next round. And then there was ballots, and it was the first conference that was on Zoom, which was odd in itself. But you know, people tend to got engaged. A lot of this is going to be down to the SNP membership to say, you know, are you accepting continuity and going to sleep, or can you see? Do you acknowledge that there is, at least in kind of half the membership just now, probably more of the ones that voted for continuity out of a bit of, oh, don't scare the horses, you know, everything better to be safe, you know, and keep things as stable as possible. But what that creates for me is a real irony in the sense that the SNP is a party that wants to deliver Scottish independence, and we talk about convincing the unconvinced, the soft nose, whatever, and people generally are quite resistant to change. So the party that's asking the country to adopt change are actually afraid of change themselves. And I find that really hard to square from what the SNP was, you know, back, you know, like kind of generations when people were, you know, most of those individuals we've now lost to the independence movement, or who are very, like, you know, in their kind of later years. But these people fought for this when it was an odd thing to do, you know, when it was pretty radical to speak about Scottish independence and to stand in a party, when it was, you know, if you got into double figures in an election, it was a celebration. And where's that fire gone and that spirit? And that's what I saw in what Ash Regan's offering was in the campaign. I think it did, as you say, Bailey, I think it resonated with a lot of people who really saw that we are in such a dreadful situation just now and powerless that the kind of devolved continuity is not actually going to achieve what we need to achieve in Scotland to build a better country for the people that live here. Because there's so much of what's out there that's not within our power. We don't control when the general election is. We don't control the franchise for it. Nicola Sturgeon had talked about a de facto referendum at Westminster, which is if you have that one-off event and you fail, what is that? What's next? If you have to have a special conference after a Supreme Court reference that you brought, your Lord Advocate brought, then you're not anticipating what happens, to game the potential outcomes of these things. So there's a whole bunch of stuff I think we need to start really drilling into, because time is not in Scotland's side, and devolution has not protected Scotland. And if we don't do something about it, the people of Scotland, and particularly the party that have been empowered to deliver that, they're certainly not empowered for their personalities. They really need to step up. Otherwise, events will move on.
Bailey?
I think that when the party first came to power, we consistently, year on year, published a programme for government that was bold, ambitious, pushed devolution to the boundaries. We'd done things in a way that we've sort of lost our way. And, Ash and Kate, in a sense, had said that, the party has lost its way. I remember joining the party at such a young age. In fact, I remember the first time meeting an SNP parliamentarian, and Annabel Ewing, at 9 years old. And sort of, I had jokingly said to her a few weeks ago that she captured me in by, from then. And it was a party that, growing up, that I was able to resonate with and think, oh my God, I thought we couldn't do better than this, and we're doing, quadruple that. And I take things like free school meals for all pupils, the Queensferry crossing, the baby box, which is obviously a credit to Nicola Sturgeon. And I think we have lost our way in a bit, and we've got ourselves tied up in these court challenges. We obviously went through Brexit. I don't think we used Brexit to our advantage enough, anyway. And obviously there was all throughout COVID. I think for the party to actually show the Scottish people that it is serious about continuing to deliver for Scotland, whilst also trying to get us their independence, which needs to be put front and centre. If the Tory cost of living crisis is anything to go by, times are only going to get tougher and matters are only going to get worse. As the way it goes, and that's probably guaranteed with a right-wing Labour government, so to speak, under Keir Starmer. So the party really needs to get back to delivering well for the Scottish people. The adult disability payment, for example, just now, that's a 10-month wait. From application to payment. We need to iron that out. We need to get on with good governance and good policy. In fact, excellent policy that the Scottish people back, rather than policy which we think they back, and then the polls tell us they don't, but screw it, we're going ahead and doing it anyway. And we show them the vision that another 5 years of SNP government can deliver them, but actually at the same time say, well, actually, that's the vision under devolution. Here's what that could look like under independence. And that should always go hand in hand. So anything that the government goes out to do, and this was actually something that we had asked for from the Permanent Secretary. So in the event that Ash won, we were asking for every single policy briefing that was put on the desk of a minister, including the First Minister, they be given another briefing, side to side with that, showing here is what would be possible under independence and the powers of independence. It was possible, the PermSec confirmed that we could do that, and I just think that's what we should now be taking to the Scottish people. Because
so why has it not happened before? Why do we still rely on GERS? Why are we looking at everything through a United Kingdom prism? You're absolutely right, Billy. They've basically, for power is a double-edged sword, because you start to focus on keeping power rather than reminding yourself of why you have power, what you got it for in the first place. And I think, the policies, every policy should have been continually taking devolution to its boundaries, to the walls, hitting that wall and showing the wall, to the people of Scotland to say we can go this far and no further because of our constitutional arrangement with the UK. Devolution, we should wring out everything we can from devolution, but for the people of Scotland to deliver good government, but you have to show people the wall that is there. If you want to go beyond that wall, you have to do that under your own steam through independence.
There is good news in the sense that the Labour Party will not pull together a policy platform that is votable, because they never do. Quite frankly, the Labour Party are a joke. The Tories are a bit of a joke because once they have a referendum to rail against, they'll quite like the idea there's a referendum round the corner, because that's what they run on. And the Lib Dems, while they come up with lots of policies, they're generally nonsense policies that nobody's interested
But the SNP also comes up with a lot of policy developed by members and passed by members. But if you ask any member of the SNP, they'll say, I don't know where you find that.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to cover here is obviously Nicola Sturgeon had a tight grasp, and Humza Yousaf has promised to be a bit more of a bigger tent, or whatever phrase we're using now. Now we're not going to judge him on his cabinet ministers being the barometer of that. Let's see how that plays over the next couple of weeks, and whether or not his policy platform, once it's laid out, and when his PFG and his alternation to the current PFG gets delivered. That will be the important thing, where we see the delineation in what he does. There's a couple of softer things I want to touch on just before we finish. So, thank you for bringing up Gers, Alison. We definitely need to get a guest on. We definitely need to get a guest on to talk about Gers. I really want to get somebody to talk about currency as well, because I think these are big ideas that have been discussed. I think we're back into the idea game. I think that it's a shame in some ways that Derek Mackay never completed his work on Gers, and I'm certainly open to the podcast hosting even Derek Mackay, if he's a viewer of Viva to come and tell us what he was going to deliver.
Hi, Derek.
Yeah, if he's there. Because he was originally going to replace the reporter that was Gers. I think he was going to do it side by side, and it was going to be a more Scottish version of Gers. I don't know what you'd call that, Sers maybe. So I want to explore that. But secondly, Alison, you said something interesting that I'm only now percolating in my mind. Did you say when you stood, have you tried to be an MP at some point?
No, I meant for NEC.
Ah, for NEC. Right, new question then.
I am not.
So, obviously there's a lot of talent that's locked in Westminster. I think that, I don't think it's that controversial to say that we want our top talent in Holyrood, and that's considered, we don't certainly leave Westminster underpowered, but at the same time there are certain bright lights in Westminster that would be helpful to be in Holyrood for there's numerous people. I think one of the ones we thought was like Philippa Whitford make an awesome health secretary, and I think we discussed that on a previous podcast. So here's my question to you. The SNP had massive expansion in 2015, which led to the current intake, and we're not going to call anybody hopeless or anything. We're not that mean. We'd invite them on to come and tell us about themselves. But what I'd like to do, how does the party attract talent? How does it get new people in? For example, Alison, would you stand as an MP or an MSP? Bailey, the same question to you.
Alison?
Usefully delegated.
I know, thanks for that, Bailey. I don't have any aspirations to be a politician, but I believe passionately in Scottish independence. And I guess everybody really needs to do whatever their best contribution is. And I'm not sure that's mine, but I think there's a whole field of play there. We can't all be tripping over each other to get the ball when the opposition's going on goal. So I wouldn't say never, and there is a temptation because I've got a local MP who's I think I would quite enjoy having a hearty debate at Hustings with.
So I'm going to push on that a little bit. Who would you say? So you've dropped some names privately before with me.
Yeah.
Who do you think?
So the people the people I want in Scottish politics, top tier Scottish politics, are not actually in Scottish politics at the moment, but have been. So my kind of number one person I would have in Scottish politics is Duncan Hamilton, who was an MSP in the first intake in 1999, who's now quite fairly recently a KC, but phenomenal debater, really good kind of like personality, very inspiring, and I think would be, an excellent addition to Scottish politics, and would really, pardon the pun, raise the bar. Yeah.
Okay, Bailey, same question to you. Would you ever want to stand? Obviously, you're a very young councillor. You're 21 now. You're one of the youngest in Fife Council. Do you think that your future could include being an MP or MSP, or potentially even being an MEP if we manage to get back into that union?
The honest question is I don't know. I'm in politics for two reasons, and they actually go hand in hand. And that's to give everyone the best chance in life and to eradicate child poverty, which we could do, I believe, quite quickly.
So not independence.
But also with independence, because both of them go hand in hand. That's the two issues why I'm here, why I'm in politics. They go hand in hand. I don't think you could do one without the other.
No, neither do I, for what it's worth.
So, but in terms of aspirations, the only way I would see myself progressing, so to speak, going up the ladder as it's referred to, would be if I knew I could make a difference. And that would be the same if I was an MSP or, whatever, and I got asked to take on an additional role as a minister, I would have to have a long and hard think about, whether I could do it and do it well in terms of making a difference, or if I'm just taking this job to be a figure piece and not actually take decisions. As Ivan McKee said, over the course of this week, he felt like all he was being offered was the chance to be a headshot, the minister for people to complain to, and then not actually be able to do anything about it. So, that's my reasoning behind that.
Okay, who do you think we're missing in Scottish politics? Who do you think we should be adding to the MP or MSP set? You can steal from other parties, you can steal from other countries if you so wish.
It's a tough one. I mean, quite a lot. One thing I do agree with is that we have a lot of talent in Westminster. I think that's a good thing. We have a lot of talent in Holyrood as well. It's just not being harnessed enough within the recent ministerial picks. But I'd like to see Stephen Flynn return to Scottish politics in terms of in Holyrood. He's never been, obviously, in Holyrood, but I'd like to see him there. Sorry?
I was going to say he was a councillor, he wasn't an MSP.
Well,
no, he wasn't an MSP.
Up for each other here, Alison.
But no, I think Stephen connects with voters as well. More so than Humza and more so than Ian Blackford. I mean, they reference Stephen Flynn day in, day out, nearly every second or third door you go to. They say, oh, that guy, great. And I think, if we have people like Stephen who's actually screwed in on the issues and read up on the ones that are important to his constituents and to the future of Scotland and Scottish independence, we could be doing so much more with people like him.
Yeah. Can I say one quick thing to that? There's I always remember in football, the particularly Scottish football, they talk about promising youngster. I mean, Stephen has done a lot since he's been the group leader, and I think he's impressed a lot of people with the Prime Minister's questions even. But, it is still quite early days. He's only been in Parliament since 2019. And I found it really interesting that a lot of people were saying that Ash Regan was a kind of newcomer, but she's been re-elected. She's been in Parliament since 2016. The kind of cohort that we think about with Ian Blackford and Philippa Whitford, Joanna Cherry, they're only a year ahead. They were 2015, and yet Ash Regan's 49 or something, and Stephen Flynn's 34, and a lot was all said about Mary Black when she first got elected. But having seen her recently on TV about the budget, I didn't even know what fuel duty meant. I think we need to the vetting of it, we need to not look at surface value and give people an opportunity. Otherwise we're setting them up to fail because we've got expectations because of some speeches. I mean, my MPs, stood up in, the European Parliament and gave 2 speeches people know him for, and that's pretty much it as far as I'm concerned as a constituent of what I've seen of him, particularly during lockdown. So I would like to see people who work, a lot of MPs and MSPs and councillors work really hard, but they don't spend time self-promoting. So I think we need to start getting a much deeper look at and we've talked about this before, Graham, on the blogs and on the podcast about the kind of scorecard and actually measuring up what you said you were going to do and what you have done and how people perform, like kind of performance analysis.
I personally think that we need to get more MPs and MSPs, councillors and people of the party on the podcast so we can explore their thoughts and obviously find out how much, because obviously Nicola Sturgeon's shadow was very vast, and a lot of people kind of copied what the party leadership, the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon were saying. There wasn't a lot of individual deviation in different routes, and I'm hopeful that now that that bubble has kind of popped, we might be in a situation where radical and different ideas come out. But that is us rounding on an hour now, so do you have any final thoughts you want to wrap up with, Bailey or Alison?
I've just got one to say that I'm not entirely convinced Nicola Sturgeon's shadow has left the building. I think a lot of the thing that really struck me was the fact Colin McAllister is still the chief of staff, so which is an odd thing when you've got a new leadership to keep the same chief of staff. That's quite a personal appointment, so I'm not sure. Although Nicola Sturgeon and her husband are away, what away actually means.
Really?
The other thing I'd like to finish on is with what Ash Regan started her campaign with and finished it with, and that's that, independence, nothing less, now more than ever.
Well, everyone, you've been watching or listening to the Viva Cost podcast, which is obviously your pro-independent Scottish blog. We have many podcasts available on YouTube and anchor.fm/Viva Cost. We're available on Apple Podcasts, we're available on Spotify, and you can ask your Alexa device to give you a copy of our podcast these days. We are going to be covering over the next 2 weeks the Ash Regan campaign diaries, which are an inside look into the Ash Regan campaign, all the way from when the campaign team was assembled, through some of the funnier moments, such as the independence thermometer, and all the way through to the result. We have the inside scoop, and you don't want to miss it. Thank you and goodbye.
Good night.